to call the Economic Development Committee to order. I'm joined by my colleagues Nuri Martinez and Paul Krikorian. We're going to take public comment. We've got several cards, and let's prepare to do that as we welcome Councilman Cedillo to join us. But I've got cards from Mary Howard, Deandra Bremen, Victor Naro, and Angie Diaz. If you all would come forward, please, at this time. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Can we get some chairs?
Oh, the chairs are there.
Where are the chairs?
They're pushed in. Council member, they're just pushed in. They're there.
Yeah.
Oh, the chairs are there. Okay. Can't see them from here. Mary, Deandra, Victor, and Angie, please.
Okay.
We'll take Mary Howard first. Ms. Howard?
Yes.
You may proceed, ma'am. You may proceed.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I came here today because I believe that you were discussing the housing problem in Los Angeles, and that the transient occupancies via Airbnb were interfering with the availability of housing. I wanted to speak about the advantages and possible disadvantages. So I made a few notes. First of all, I want to say that I've been paying 14% transient occupancy tax for the buildings that I manage for the transient occupancies within them since 2009. This month, I'll be paying $1,400 for the month, for January. So the transient occupancies are valuable because of the income from the 14%. But not only is that true, when a building such as the two that my husband and I have need repairs because they were built in 1951 and 1952, the rents that come in normally fail to cover the necessary upgrades and repairs. For example, in the one building that I've managed the longest, my husband and I got married this past year, so then he obtained that building and already had another one. And that building, the first one that I managed, I have put solar panels on it, put tankless water heaters, and artificial grass, and upgraded the electricity.
Okay. Could you please summarize your remarks? Your time has expired. We'd like to give me finish your sentence, though.
Your voice is so soft. My hearing is so bad. I'm wearing hearing aids,
Okay.
and I can't.
No, I'm asking you to. Your time has expired. I'm asking you to.
Oh, I didn't know I had a time.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, can I quickly finish?
Quickly. Yes, please.
Okay. So there's a trickle-down problem that happens. I won't have any maid service anymore to clean them up. The construction trades will have to go bye-byes, and no more building permits. The consequences of having the people come in from countries all over the world are car rentals, groceries, clothing, restaurants, and entertainment that also increases your income, as you well know. So I just want to say that, in summary, entrepreneurs are what we are, and that's the stuff that America was made from. And would you please consider these positives that I've presented in your considerations?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Deandra Breman?
Thank you, Councilman, and good afternoon to the rest of the council members here today. My name is Deandra Breman, and I'm here representing the Brotherhood Crusade. In a matter of months, you'll be deciding on whether or not to raise the minimum wage. And this is a very important decision that will affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of Angelenos. As I understand it, the council is looking into exempting nonprofits from paying this minimum. This would be a mistake. At Brotherhood Crusade, we run programs that help people get themselves on their feet. These folks are coming from incarceration, homelessness, and some are veterans, trying to normalize their lives. The first thing these folks need is a good job, and we commit to providing only good jobs for these folks, even if it means to have to raise a little more money to do so. We've got to walk the walk. Any nonprofit that isn't willing to do so is perpetuating the problems that they are trying to address. We advise the council to hold all employers to the same standard, especially those that want to affect change in the community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Victor Nario.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Victor Nario from the UCLA Labor Center. As you know, we appreciate the efforts of this committee to address the issue of living wages for workers in Los Angeles, and we all support that effort. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about wage theft. I authored a report back in 2010, Wage Theft in Los Angeles, which highlights a crisis that we have here in Los Angeles. It's not just an economic crisis. I consider it a humanitarian crisis. Workers in Los Angeles lose $26.2 million per week in stolen wages. So while we're fighting for minimum wage, it's very important to emphasize that many workers in Los Angeles are not even earning the $9 an hour minimum wage. For them, a minimum wage doesn't exist. We would want to move forward and make sure we address wage theft enforcement as we move forward for a living wage in Los Angeles. We also want laws that are going to be effective. And one of the other crises here in California is 83% of workers who do file a claim and are successful in filing a claim for unpaid wages, 83% are not able to collect anything at the end of the process. So we're asking for a process that is able to collect on the unpaid wages, where we have effective tools for enforcement, protect the rights of workers who do encounter retaliation when they lift up their voices and exercise their rights in the workplace, and also the ability to enforce. And we're willing to partner with the city in many ways, but create some kind of entity that can be responsible for enforcement of the minimum wage policy, similar to what other cities around the country and here in California are doing right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Angie Diaz?
Yeah. Hello, members of the committee. My name is Angie Diaz. I'm 16 years old, and I attend Los Angeles Big Picture High School. Last summer, I attended the Miguel Contreras Foundation Youth Summer Program. There, I learned about issues regarding race, class, and gender. I learned about organizing efforts for the rights of workers and immigrants led by young people like myself. I am inspired and committed to bettering conditions for myself and my family. My parents earn the minimum wage, and sometimes not even that, because they don't always get paid what they earn. I have learned this is called wage theft and must be enforced. I have seen the burden and unjust minimum wage and wage theft have had on my family. My parents work full-time or more, and we still don't have enough sometimes to pay rent, to eat healthy, or to plan for our future. I have a dream of going to college because my parents cannot help me more on their wages. I will have to get a job as a high school student, and while in college, I will also have to have a job. This will likely be a minimum wage job because wages are as low as they are and expenses so high. I actually have to take on 2 or 3 jobs. For not only my parents, but for young people like me, the minimum wage is so important. Please raise the minimum wage to $15 for all. It will help us reach our dreams, and it's only fair for those who work hard. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. That's going to conclude our public comment at this time. Minimum wage is not on our agenda today, but it will be soon, so we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we have an action-packed agenda and a special agenda. I'm going to recommend that we move items 3 through 5 on consent, unless there is an objection.
Objection.
Any objection? Okay, well, that will be the order. And let's take items 1 and 2 together. Mr. Clerk, would you please read those items for us?
Item number 1 is a CAO report relative to asset management, strategic planning, and recommendations for evaluation of city properties for city use and economic development. Item number 2 is a motion Cedillo Buscaino relative to a report from the Chief Legislative Analyst and the Economic and Workforce Development Department with a policy on how funds will be appropriated to the Economic Development Trust Fund, including rents received from the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, a designated local authority, future development properties.
Okay, this is a topic of interest to us all. How we're going to treat properties identified for economic development, including their sale and proceeds. Gentlemen?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm Josh Romer from the Office of the City Administrative Officer.
And I'm Matt Mason from the CLA.
So item number 1 before you proposes various actions to establish a clear city process to evaluate and identify city properties that are opportunities for reuse and economic development. The council established the Asset Management Strategic Planning, or AMSP unit, to provide the framework for and perform preliminary analysis of the city's asset management planning needs. The city currently has a somewhat ad hoc approach and an unclear process for the reuse of city properties for uses other than municipal facilities. So the goal of the framework before you, the goals include providing a clear process for the evaluation of properties for reuse, informed by a documented analysis, provide a way for the city to identify properties that are good economic development opportunities, for which the city has recently expanded its abilities to dispose of through the Economic and Workforce Development Department. And also to be responsive to both council and departmental objectives, but also enable a proactive evaluation of the city's properties. The process is meant to be inclusive, and any proposed reuse of a city property would be initiated by a council motion. So the consideration of the reuse of city properties, including for economic development, joint use, nonprofit leases, surplus disposition, etc., would be initiated by council motion and be directed to the CAO Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit. Working with the affected departments, EWD, GSD, CLA, and the council office, AMSP will prepare recommendations for consideration by the city's Municipal Facilities Committee. The city's existing body with membership from the CAO, the CLA, and the Office of the Mayor that already makes decisions about the appropriate use for city properties regarding the proposed reuse of any properties. MFC recommendations would be forwarded then on to committee and council for consideration by City Council. So the report also recommends establishment of an economic development trust fund to receive the proceeds from the sale or lease of any economic development designated properties. And this fund will be administered by EWD and used to fund economic development programs and projects. The report also requests a report back from EWD for basically program guidelines for how ED trust fund monies could actually be used to fund the city's economic development efforts. The report requests a report from EWD regarding staffing considerations, given this is a relatively new function for EWD to determine whether they need additional resources. And finally, proposes to appoint the Economic and Workforce Development Department General Manager as an ex officio non-voting member of the Municipal Facilities Committee. So I'm happy to answer any additional questions on this item.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. Do we have a list of city properties by council district yet? Is there a definitive list?
The definitive is the key question, I think. So
Yeah, that's the question.
The General Services Department is the city's property manager. They do have a list, and this list has acknowledged deficiencies and some overlaps. It's generally somewhat confusing to keep this completely accurate. GSD and our office have been working together to develop a plan to basically refine this list to make sure that it's completely accurate and also have it in a more easily searchable, more user-friendly database format, and it'll serve many other functions, including property management. And really,
Does that mean you don't have a complete list yet, then, or what is?
we have a complete list. I would say that the data is not completely accurate, and there are sometimes overlapping records.
Okay.
And I would just suggest, so this, kind of concurrently with developing this framework, we are developing a much more clean list and a searchable database. And our intent with this is that we can, with the cleaner list, work with council offices to identify what the best opportunities are in each county district and help develop your priorities.
I'm sure we're all anxious to get that information. Now, you recommended that the proceeds sold would go, in a district, would go entirely to the Economic Development Trust Fund, which is a little departure from what normally occurs, that there's a 50-50 split, I'm told. What's the rationale behind this new direction of funds?
So, as you mentioned, properties that go through a surplus disposition process, which is a separate process, are generally split 50-50 with general fund and a council district real property trust fund. This is a separate process for disposition, and given that the city has had a difficult time devoting specific resources to fund EWD and its economic development programs, we thought that this was an appropriate source of funds that could be utilized specifically for economic development purposes in the future. So the proposal is meant to provide, it wouldn't be a consistent, but it would be a considerable source of funds potentially to EWD. And the thought of having it be citywide was to give the department as much flexibility as possible to really use these funds effectively in a citywide manner. So that's why it's a different approach than that was currently used for surplus properties.
Okay. Members, any questions? Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on the chair's question, this alternative approach, I guess the question is, how will we determine which properties are appropriate to dispose of through the ordinary surplus property disposition, and what properties are appropriate for the alternative approach, and what role will each council member of each district have in making that decision?
Okay. So good question. So the current process that the city has had traditionally has been a surplus property process. And there's both city requirements for how to dispose of properties in that manner, but also state requirements. The series of steps, the General Services Department basically manages that. It's generally lengthy, a lot of steps to it because of the both city and state requirements. It takes, I think it's fair to say, between 9 months and a year and a half to do a surplus property in that fashion. And part of the state requirements is that you need to offer it to other departments across the state for open space or affordable housing purposes. Separate from that, and that's the way the city traditionally disposes of surplus property. Separate from that, the Economic Workforce Development Department now has a new way to dispose of properties that doesn't have to go through all the surplus procedures. As long as the property, we could say, is going to be continuing to serve the city's best interest post-disposition because it's providing economic development benefits, whether that is the provision of living wage jobs on the property or a host of other economic development properties. So for a property that the city determines is appropriate for economic development, there's a shorter, streamlined disposition process, and we don't have to offer it for other uses. And so so the way the process is established in this proposal is that the asset management strategic planning recommendations that go to council make a recommendation whether a property is appropriate for the economic development disposition, or whether, if it maybe doesn't have enough economic development value to go through that, if we should still recommend doing the surplus process, because both have their uses.
So it might be important for a particular council member who wants to advance jobs creation and economic development in a community to utilize city property in a way that will advance development of a big project, for example, as well as deliver some funds into the trust fund. That might be more advantageous to the people of a district and that council member than the surplus property distribution, which just usually gets a few shekels, but not usually at the highest best use.
Yes, that is correct. And so, and I'm meant to highlight that also the actual evaluation of any property would be initiated by a council motion, and so the council office obviously
That's the important part.
plays a major role in terms of the recommendations.
Now, I hate to complicate this any further because I'm so pleased to hear your answer to the chairman's first question about the existence of this list, a list that I've asked for well, I've been on the council for 5 years, so for 5 years now, I've been asking for that list, and I am...
I met someone yesterday who told me they waited 20 years.
Yeah, I'm certain of it.
Yeah.
I'm certain, and so this is great progress, and I'm delighted to see it happen. Does it include the proprietaries?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, so for most of us, that means the DWP. We need to have the DWP properties on there as well, and that includes not just their, locations with a street address, but also their transmission line right-of-ways. Because in my district in particular, and I think in Ms. Martinez's district as well, the transmission line right-of-ways are grossly underutilized, extraordinarily valuable assets that should be used for economic development that are usually in hard-hit communities that need jobs and economic development. And it's ridiculous to have that much property set aside for wires to go overhead. So to me, this is extremely important, and I want to make sure that that's included within this plan. Not for we obviously can't dispose of them, but to utilize them, retaining ownership and retaining control by the DWP, but to utilize them to their maximum benefit for jobs creation and economic development. And I don't want to complicate it further, but has anything been done in terms of personal property as opposed to real property that the city might be able to utilize for economic development?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can report back on that.
Okay. Just by way of quick example, when Parker Center closed, there was a warehouse filled with all sorts of things that the police department had there. I mean, incredible stuff that a prop house, for example, would have loved to have, or that, I'm sure other police agencies that we could have disposed of, a warehouse full of stuff. I don't know how it was disposed of, but, I'd like to know that we have a process in place so that valuable items like that aren't necessarily surplus, but have a retained value, are maximized for not just the return of cash, but also economic development opportunities, like helping local prop houses that are helping us to make movies, for example.
Good. Members, any other comments this time? Okay, I'm going to recommend that we amend and adopt the CAO's recommendation as follows: to authorize the Municipal Facilities Committee to designate qualified city properties for economic development or other use, and to assign to appropriate city departments for implementation, subject to council approval, all in conformance with the procedures described in Attachment A of the CAO report dated October 28, 2014. Further move that we adopt recommendations 2, 3, 8, and 9, that we instruct CLA and EWDD to report back to us in 2 weeks on CAO recommendations 4, 5, 6, and 7, and that we receive and file the CAO report dated August 19th, 2014. Members, without objection? Without objection, that shall be the order. Oops. Sorry.
We also have a card on this item.
I'm sorry, we do have a card, John. How could I overlook you?
I'll be brief.
Yes, sir.
I'm John Hallen. Good afternoon. John Hallen with the Central City Association. CCA supports these two items. We wholly support a dedicated revenue stream and a formal process for procuring funds through a trust fund for the Economic Development and Workforce Development Department. All of the major cities that Los Angeles competes with to attract and to retain jobs have very robust economic development departments or separate nonprofit entities that are affiliated with the city, and we support anything that can give a dedicated revenue stream to help the Economic and Workforce Development Department to attract and retain businesses, obviously in downtown, but throughout the city. This is a very good start. We encourage you, as you go through the budget process this year, next year, to look for other ways to fund those, because these businesses create jobs which end up going to the bottom line of the city through various taxes. So we ask for the aye vote where you guys were going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Let me clarify. We're going to continue item 2. for discussion next, in 2 weeks as well. Without objection? Okay, that will be the order. All right, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Okay.
You did that? You do that?
Okay, we're going to adjourn the regular meeting and go to the special,
Funding, yes.
the special agenda. Mr. Clerk?
You want me to read item number 6? You have 2 bids and a
Well,
motion.
we're going to move items 1 and 2 on consent. There's no objection. And this is for the special agenda. This is another agenda, special agenda.
Those are items 6 and 7, sir.
6, 7, and 8.
Where are we? So what are we doing? All right, we're going to move 6 and 7 on consent. Is that better? Sorry about that. All right. And then, was that Peter? Okay, and we'll call item 8.
Item number 8 is a motion, Vaughn and Buscaino, relative to an instruction to the Economic and Workforce Development Department with assistance from the Bureau of Engineering, the CAO, and the CLA to report on the feasibility of creating an enhanced infrastructure financing district as a potential funding source for infrastructure, affordable housing, and other vital economic development initiatives in Venice Beach.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. There was a presentation made yesterday on the EIFDs. We heard in the LA River Committee yesterday in Arts and River. Can you give us an overview of this exciting new vehicle and how it's being proposed to be used and how we can potentially use it?
I would love to thank you, council members. Jenny Scanlon with the Economic and Workforce Development Department. We were able to initiate, I think, a good start to a conversation about this new tool that the state has adopted and is anticipated to be a tool available to municipalities to find ways to finance and improvements in those communities and revitalize communities. And really it came about as a response to the end of redevelopment and a request from local communities for the state to consider other tools to put back in that toolbox. And so this is basically a reconfiguration of a tool the state already had in place called an Infrastructure Finance District. However, that sort of former tool was a difficult one to use and was not actually very often used by municipalities because it had some high thresholds that needed to be met in terms of voting requirements, and it was limited in terms of the funds that could be used and the purpose of it. And so cities and counties never really adopted that tool. This is the sort of the remake of that concept, and it's called the Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District. It's different in that it allows the cities and counties to potentially work together to voluntarily contribute what's called tax increment, which is any new taxes coming in from the property that the municipality would normally receive in an increased value situation after an enhanced infrastructure finance district is created. So, so you'll start out with obviously your baseline revenue, which is your general fund dollars, and then what this would do would be siphon off an agreed upon percentage of any new income coming in and transfer it to a public finance authority. That public finance authority is set up through the steps in the process to adopt an enhanced infrastructure finance district. The governance through the Public Finance Authority, the membership of that group or that separate entity is really based on who is contributing. So in this tool, you can either as a city set up your own Public Finance Authority and only put in your tax increment, but that's really, I think, not the intention behind this tool, and it's not really of high benefit or high value to us. What's of value is when municipalities get together, when potentially our city gets together with the county, potentially even with other cities, adopts a larger boundary area, a district, where everybody contributes a percentage of their tax increment. Once that money goes in, then those funds are available for a preset group of programs. So when you adopt the district, you also adopt a set of programs and projects that would be funded within that district. And that's where it's very interesting, because you have not just your typical facility improvements or public infrastructure improvements that are allowed under the use of this tool. You can now spend those dollars on other things like affordable housing, commercial development, industrial development. You can focus on transit-oriented priority projects. You can focus on sustainable community plans and investments in projects that meet those requirements for reduced emissions under those plans. So there's a lot of agility in terms of the program of projects that could be funded with those dollars. So I think there's a lot to this tool. It's complex in terms of how it's implemented. It obviously has some implications for the city's general fund moving forward, because you're in reality siphoning off potentially future money that would go into that general fund to go into these special projects in these special districts. But ultimately, all of that would be analyzed at the time that you adopt an infrastructure plan, and you would have to make findings to ensure that you are not having a negative impact, obviously, on your financial circumstances within the city by adopting that plan. So all of those issues get considered. All of the actions take place at the council level. So it's really the council that would initiate the request to look at developing a district, and it is the council that ultimately decides whether to adopt a district or not and set up that public financing authority. So it's not a tool that anyone has used. It was recently adopted, so it's just become effective as of January 1st. We don't have a lot of precedents. As I said, the sort of older version of this in the Infrastructure Finance District model was only used once or twice by the city and county of San Francisco. But it really has not been used throughout the state. So we are sort of in uncharted territory. But I think that it does have a very good sort of set process and procedure, which we would presumably adopt within the city. And we have, as I said, a report going through right now, which makes a recommendation, among others, that our department, the Economic and Workforce Development Department, work with the CAO, CLA, and other bodies as necessary to really set up a policy that the city could use in that adoption process. So it would lay out basically sort of a plan and a procedure for initiating or suggesting the initiation of an infrastructure finance district, and then what process it would go through within our own City of LA typical procedures, committees, et cetera, that would be hearing that out, and who would be responsible for various activities as it relates to that adoption. We know that the process in and of itself is an elongated one. We anticipate that any adoption process from sort of start to finish is going to be at least a year, if not 2 years long. So it's a significant amount of time that we would have to sort of set aside. It's obviously a significant amount of resources in terms of city staff that would be dedicated to sort of going through and sifting through all of the data that we would need to really put this into place. And then ultimately, because of CEQA requirements, we would need funds available for outside consultants to help us with any kind of environmental documents or any really in-depth financial analysis that would have to be done. So we do suggest that the city be prepared in moving something like this forward to also identify funds for the types of consultant work and underlying work that would need to be done to get something adopted. But aside from that, we do think that it is something that is worth looking into. We do think that it is an interesting way, especially if we have areas where we know that we have a partnership with the county and an interest, an aligned interest. It's a wonderful way for us to share resources to meet the needs of those communities or to meet large infrastructure needs for our city in general. So,
Any limitations on the number of EIFDs that can be established in an area or in a city or county? Any limitation?
There is no limit, and you can, we spoke about this a little bit, you can actually overlap infrastructure finance districts as long as you are putting in only a share of your tax increment. So you could put in, if you wanted to adopt two districts that overlap, you could potentially put in 50% of your tax increment into one district and 50% into the other. So there are ways that you can have cross boundaries. You can adopt as many as you want, but again, all of that is going to be set by an analysis of how much money the city needs in general to cover its existing program and its future program of services covered through the general fund, and how much we'd be willing to set aside for special projects. So it is, you're playing with your own money and figuring out how much of your own money you want to put into something like this. And then you also, as I said, need to be aligned with the county and other participating taxing entities to make sure that they're also contributing and that the program is going to obviously include certain projects that they're going to be very interested in funding as well.
I have a question.
Councilwoman?
Thank you, Chair. I'm certainly very interested in following this new policy, particularly in Venice, but at the same time, can the department report back as to what other areas besides Venice you would recommend an enhanced infrastructure financing district so that we can get a better sense as to what other parts of the city would benefit from something like this? Do you have a sense of what those other parts, or I should say other communities? In particularly, I'm interested in Panorama City and Van Nuys in my district. So can you bring some recommendations forward?
We could consider. We have not made any recommendations at this point. We have only responded to requests from various council offices who have asked us to look into specific districts or boundaries. I think that we would be happy to put together a list. I think that you could say in general, there's a whole body of work throughout the city and communities that would want to be revitalized, and this is one tool that could be used. I think that it would require us to have further conversations with other affected taxing entities to see where we have aligned interest, and I think that is going to be our first cut in terms of being rational about an approach to where we really want to push this tool. So again, I would say that there's probably many places throughout the city where this would be an effective tool, but yes, we could.
Yeah, but maybe areas that haven't seen any economic development opportunities since the Northridge earthquake in 1994. Maybe that'd be a good start.
Yeah, and we anticipate that your council, as the policymakers of the city, will put forward also your own ideas, and and that's why I think we wanted to set forward really a policy or a structure to start with, so that those ideas could be properly vetted, and we can at least try to set some benchmarks for analyzing them. So I think we're taking a step back to try to at least do that first, so that we all are everything is sort of equally valued and analyzed, And then from that, I'm hoping we could then sift through all of these areas and then determine which ones maybe should take first priority based on a set of circumstance that sort of meets with a criteria that we all agree on.
Mr. Correa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I had the same thought. I think we all probably did. But it sounds like the direction that you're going in is to communicate with the council, but to develop a foundational policy first, and then we would presumably be, helping to take the lead in recommending particular areas that this might be appropriate. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely fair to say. I think you will obviously be involved in helping us set that policy and adopting it, and setting those criterias, and then yes, putting forward your concepts for plans that you think will meet that criteria.
So to the criteria point, redevelopment agencies had a whole, number of limiting factors that as to where you could put a redevelopment agency. What are the factors that are prerequisite to establishing one of these EIFDs now? Are there demographic factors,
actually,
income, lighting issues? Are there? I mean, what are the determinants as to where you can do it, or are there any?
There are none.
Okay.
It is very different from redevelopment that you do not have to make what was termed blight findings under prior redevelopment law.
Right.
So you can set the boundaries as you see fit. The criteria is really around the projects that you select to fund, and those projects have to be considered to be of community-wide benefit to that district that you create. So it's really about aligning the projects to and showing a nexus to their benefit to that area. And then ultimately, there are certain things that are prohibited from funding. They're few, but significant, that you can't obviously finance or fund normal maintenance or services that the city or county would provide, and you cannot fund the replacement of an existing facility that the city already has in place. So it's really about enhancements and expansions, and then significant rehab.
So our challenge in drawing the districts is more of an economic one, because the larger the district, the bigger blow to the general fund for the loss of tax increment, and you have to figure out where your return on investment on your economic development investment is best going to be had. Okay, so under the old IFDs, school districts' tax increment couldn't be taken away. So how is that still the case here? Do we if we get everybody on board, can we use the full tax increment, or is it? Are there carve-outs to it?
Yes, and that's a good question I should have answered earlier. There are carve-outs in the law. You cannot use any tax increment going to school districts, community college districts, or county board of education. So those are carved out. So you're really your main financing would come from the city, other cities, the county, and your smaller taxing entities, so flood district, mosquito abatement, and some of the smaller groups that receive property tax, percentages of property tax.
Okay, so not quite as much.
Definitely,
ROI
yeah, it definitely reduces the amount of money that's available.
But you're not.
Thank you.
But
Senator?
I think you said yesterday, maybe, I just thought, there's no prohibition of collaborating, though, right, with the school districts if they agreed?
There is. You cannot. The school district cannot offer their funds, and you cannot ask for them. No money, no property taxes that would be going to the districts could be used. But you could, if you're talking about on your projects list,
Right.
if you wanted to put money into, yes, a community college district, a campus or a school campus, or collaborating on projects, absolutely. You can spend your dollars.
A shared soccer
Yes,
field, a
absolutely.
shared recreation environment.
Right. And they, and they could work with the Public Financing Authority on those projects.
Shared housing.
Affordable and market rate, huh? Or just affordable?
Yes, you can. One of the prohibitions is that you cannot put money into market rate housing. You can put it into affordable housing, as I said before, and if you have a deal that's like an 80-20, where you have a combination of market rate and affordable, you can put funds into that affordable side of that project or any infrastructure that would be related to that, the affordable portion.
Any other comments? Remember, this is an exciting tool.
It is.
To add to the toolbox. How we work it is another story, but for purposes today, let's adopt the motion and instruct EWDD to report back
It's in design form right now.
with a policy on establishing EIFDs in the city and to work with interested council offices to identify potential EIFD locations in their district. And if there's
Thank
no
you.
objection, that will be the order. Okay. Any other business before us at this time?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
Okay.